what foods they're addicted to, which ones they eat the most. Are they part of the 4 or 5 foods that I have really found, and I think most researchers have found to be the ones that are more likely to create that inflammation? And when somebody's been in pain for oftentimes 15, 20 years that I'm seeing, uh, they usually are an open subject ready to try to make changes and are willing to do it, because a lot of patients in their first time around of pain aren't willing to change their diet. It is their holy grail. What McKenzie really discovered that was brilliant, and I have reconfirmed it with thousands of patients, is that when you've got pain going into the leg, let's say in a low back patient, your goal is to get the pain out of the leg first. So the first goal is help them get that peripheral symptoms centralized so that it's in the back. And they may even have more pain once you get the pain out of the leg. They may have more pain in the back and experiencing more pain, but we know they are getting better. There is a real indicator that that person now is on their road to healing. Where if all of a sudden now they've got more pain in their leg and less pain in their back, it's a pretty good indicator you're going the wrong direction. What we have found is that if we can facilitate that core so that they get an automatic brace, it is far better than cognitive bracing. Cognitive bracing works, but if you happen to be talking to your friend and you push open a door and you forget to automatically cognitively brace, you're gonna hurt your back again because you're using the wrong system. There's no question that anytime we do a asymmetrical activity, such as throwing a baseball pitcher or a quarterback throwing with that right arm, it alters the mechanics throughout the system. And joints have a habit of becoming what the chiropractors would say fixated. I'd say restricted or hypomobile. And those things can create a cascade of problems down the line. If you look at hunter-gatherers again, who often are breastfed up to 2 to 3 years, they have big, wide, round craniums.
Yeah, yeah.
More we get away from breastfeeding, the longer our craniums are, and then the less we have that balance. And we end up in positions like you are, with your head
Hmm.
sideways, because you're having to level your eyes because your eyes never developed a balanced position. I like to see them first before I dive into suggestion surgery, because as you know, they've looked at large numbers of individuals who did not get a meniscus surgery and a large number of individuals who did get meniscus surgery. And that research showed that the ones who got the meniscus surgery ended up with total knees much sooner.
Henry Kreuter, aka Sifu Slim, circles back to the almost the emeritus professor, I could call you at this point. Does that sound fitting, Greg?
I'm not sure what I should be called.
Well, I mean, when you were a young trainee after your
Yep.
PT degree, you had mentors, correct? And then over time, you became a guy with 3 practices you told me about, I think in Marin. Is that correct?
I was, and then we moved to Steamboat,
How
and
many
we
years in Marin?
Marin County was 25 years.
And did you have one in the city or were they all in Marin?
No, one in the city and 2 in Marin.
And then you sold your practices?
Sold our practices, decided that we wanted to live in the mountains, and moved here to Steamboat back in '93.
How common was it for, I know you're involved in your church, how common was it from people who are your patients or staff at your practices, or people at your church who wound up reconnecting with you after you had left Marin in San Francisco?
It was fascinating. Quite a few of them would come to Steamboat for treatments, and so definitely some reconnections that occurred over that period of time. And I'm not sure how everybody found me, but they just go searching for me.
Was that post 93 and 94 when the internet was out, or was that pre when you moved to Steamboat?
No, it was it was pre,
Pre.
as far as I was concerned. It's been a while since I've seen you.
Two,
Where did I actually
2000.
treat you at? Did you come here to Steamboat? Was it that?
Yeah, I was in Steamboat for 3 months or so, and I went in for a speech pathologist, and I said I've got what I believe is a mechanical issue because I've been working on diaphragmatic breathing for over 2 years, and I think something else is up. And I had already been to, I would guess I'd seen 8 total people for a voice abuse problem that were not general practitioners, like 8 people who could have had a way to find out what the root cause was. So then I saw your associate, who was he was very involved in the church and Steamboat, solidly built ex-military guy. In 2003, he was a pastor, I think, at the church.
Yep, yep, Kevin King.
Kevin King, and he said, I can't figure it out either. I'm going to bring in the future pastor and professor emeritus, and you came in and tested me in a few different ways, and you, without an MRI and without the dye down the throat, you said, I believe you have a dislocated cricoid cartilage. And for a layman who knows the body, I had never heard of a cricoid cartilage, and I've been quizzing chiropractors and physical therapists and GPs on that question to see if they knew where the cricoid cartilage was since you taught that to me in '03. And only one out of maybe 40 people didn't know where the cricoid cartilage was. So I'm guessing these people are remembering what they learned way back when in anatomy.
That's right. Well, I'm glad I was able to help you.
And then the other thing you taught me, Greg, was I said, hey, I'm having some lower back issues. And you didn't go through a big appointment because you wanted me to work on my vocalization and your manipulations. And you taught me how to move my Adam's apple, how to
Yep,
massage all this area, how to massage underneath the chin, which, of course, since I'm one of these people who listens to their practitioner, I've been doing that every day since '03, and it's been helpful. I can't speak loudly for over 50 minutes, let's say. So that hasn't gone away, but I didn't get worse since 2003 with aging. So that, I guess that was a positive. Any
that is a
comments on
positive.
that? Yeah. So when I was in your office one time, maybe halfway through our regimen of appointments, I said, "What do I do about this lumbar? I'm doing all these great exercises. I do acupressure with a staff, like a shovel handle length of a stick or a staff, and I've been doing that since '86, and that helps." And you said, "Sleep on tennis balls." And I said, "Any clues on that?" And you said, you know the body very well. You're an empath guy. You're going to figure it out." And so what I did is I went home, and beds are often too mushy. You know, that's what you get when you stay in a rental property, a hotel. I need a hard bed, and if you go to Japanese medicine, you will
Absolutely.
find that they say, and many people in the Egoscue therapy and these types of things, they teach you that when you sleep on hard, your body softens. When you sleep on soft, your body hardens. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Did you learn that? And do you remember where and how you learned that?
I don't think I learned it from anywhere. I think it was just various different patients' needs and trying different things. I think that that's really the critical nature of a high level helper of individuals is the ability to continue to explore options, use your intuition,
I'm glad to hear
problem
you
solve.
say that.
And I
I'm glad
think
to hear you say that because I like to find seasoned veterans like Gregg Johnson, and I got to Santa Barbara after I had left you. I went to Europe for about 8 months and worked there, and then I went to Santa Barbara and took up residence there. And in my first 2 weeks, I met somebody who was a physical therapist and young guy, recent graduate, and he told me he was going to go to this continuing ed event. And I said, by any chance, is the speaker Gregg Johnson? And he said, how do you know Gregg Johnson? So I told him I was in Steamboat, this and that. And he said, I don't want to toot your horn too much, but you've been at this for a long time and you know what you do in these continuing ed. And he said, he's the man. And I said, tell me about that. He goes, when we go to these conferences, he's one of the esteemed people that we talk about and we learn from and we go to with difficult questions. So I said, I just happen to have this person as my therapist in Steamboat Springs, and I kind of fell into that, and so that was a neat thing to hear that I fell into an esteemed practitioner.
All right.
So what I did with the tennis balls you told me about is I got it down to 8, and without me sharing where I put those 8 in the lumbar area, take a guess where I put them.
Oh, for me to take a guess where you ended up with them?
Yeah.
Well, if I remember it all correctly, part of your problem was that your lumbar spine didn't have as much mobility as it should moving forward. So I would think you had to use it in your lower lumbar spine and probably up through the mid-thoracic spine to keep that more mobile.
Okay. Well, you were very, very good with the guess. I see if I can show my back. Oh, it just wants my face, so I can't go up and demonstrate. But
You mean it won't show your bottom?
yeah, it won't show my bottom. So it's hard to curve your back, your
Yep,
hand, but I can do it right here. So here's my lumbar curve that I would want to have right above
yep,
the hip joint. So I'm going to go on the left side of my spine. I'm going to go 1, 2, right side
yep,
of my spine 3, 4. And then on the outside of my right hip, I'm going to go 1, 2, outside of my left hip, 3, 3, 4. So that's 8 total. And I don't want people, in my estimation, I don't want people to lift their hips too much because that's going to offset a natural tendency. I mean, you could do it for a short time, but I sleep with these. And since I met you in '03, I've been sleeping with 8 minimum tennis balls every night. And if I, for chance, have them in like a lost luggage and I can't get them before I go to sleep that particular night in a hotel, I'll roll up a towel,
and
typically
do it with that.
not the gigantic beach towels, but like the normal shower towel, and I'll roll it up flat, and then I'll flip the ends over, and that gives me the side support for the lumbar. And then
Yep.
the hips, I may just grab some smaller towels and just go under the right and left the hip just a tad to give me some stability. Does that make
I
sense?
think that that's perfect, and I'm impressed.
Yeah, and you told me to
20,
use
2 years later, and you're still using tennis
still
balls.
using it. As I mentioned, I'm one of those people who, when you hear a good piece of advice and then you try it and it works, I don't say no to that. I use it for the rest of my life. So the interesting thing about my physicality is that I started out with PE teachers, dad, kids in the neighborhood telling me about chin-ups, push-ups, dips, squats, lunges, all these types of things. And then Jack LaLanne came about in a big way in the late '60s, so I got to watch him on television. And then as I became more of an athlete with this thin body where I'm very flexible, I'm really a Michael Jackson build. And I actually was a professional dancer before I met you as a part-time gig. I was a professional mascot in Sacramento, California. I
Wow.
I started seeing different therapists because I'm in this costume that was heavy and awkward. So it had my shoulders forward and I had a lot of weight, and I'm doing 3 hours of what you could call Michael Jackson type hip hop dancing in this heavy thing. Not all at once, but like 20 minutes in the outfit, 10 minutes out, that kind of a thing. And so I had to see therapists, and each one of these therapists gave me exercises, stretches, posture things, and so you start to realize that all of this stuff you did that was taking up 100% of your exercise, like going to the Nautilus, lifting weights, running, dancing, all this stuff. Then all of a sudden you learn the physical therapy and the Egoscue and all these other posture things, and that starts to creep into your time. So as I mentioned to many people, you start out with this bigger, stronger, faster, perhaps, and this weightlifting and speed and agility. And then once you start becoming injured, whether you're 14 or 30 or 80,
Yep.
you start working, and then eventually it could be 60% of your, if you're still not in a wheelchair, it could be 60% of your daily physical time is with therapeutic type of exercises and postural type of exercises. And I imagine this is a big change for a lot of the athletes and physical training type people you've seen, where you give them a whole new program.
No question. So everything that you're speaking of, I do has really shown to you the value of what you're doing, because it ends up always being that personal experience that guides you into understanding, because you don't keep doing an exercise if you're not seeing its value and it doesn't mean have some logic behind it. And so anything I think that we do as physical therapists always has to be ascribed to the individual for their individual needs.
Oh, that's fascinating. And maybe your success rate with getting people to follow good things that work is higher than average. But my
I think
guess,
it's way higher than average, because I don't show an exercise until I have an agreement for them to do it.
got it.
I get way too frustrated when somebody comes back and says I haven't. So I spend more time on getting the agreement and organizing their time as to when they're going to do it and what they're going to have to adapt than I do in setting up the exercise. Because I want them to have success. And they walk in, and most of them have a folder of all the exercises that different physical therapists have circled on a sheet of paper. And nobody's ever really taken control of what their needs are,
Yeah.
trying to educate them on their needs.
Yeah. A few weeks before our interview today, Greg, I had an hour and 10-minute discussion with a leader with the NSCA, of which I've been a member since 2016, out of Nebraska. And the owner of that company, the founder of that company, was a strength coach at the University of Nebraska when he became a disabled pole vaulter. You know this gentleman?
No, I don't.
No. And so what he was doing in the weight room started helping him heal from his injuries from being a pole vaulter. And then he started training some of his friends on the football team, and they saw what the coaches and the therapists started to see these results. It might have been early 70s. He was doing this, and they saw the recovery rate and the injury prevention rate from these people who were properly trained with doing good biomechanical weightlifting, weight-bearing exercises in the gym. And then he founded the NSCA, National Strength and Conditioning Association.
Yes.
And they call, their marketing is it's the gold standard in the personal training certificates. And for some things, I think it is, especially the loading of the body.
Yep.
What I found that I would lead more with is, I think Jack LaLanne and Egoscue and physical therapy exercises and maintenance exercises, in my opinion, are more important for athletes and the average human than the performance exercise and more heavier load exercises that they lead with, and they still to this day have an overarching percentage of their training is based around that. Any thoughts so far on what I've just shared, Greg?
No, and I agree with it. I think as we delve into each one of these issues, you'll see I have some of my own perspectives on everything, which is, I think, what happens to everyone is that you adjust. Gasku was something that I studied in the early 70s. I entered the profession in 1972. So I've been in it now for 54 years and
And
um, and have had a
kept
lot
it,
of
you kept adapting over that time with new information, I would imagine.
it. Well, I think that that's the constant drive. I've
Mm.
always said that I'm going to completely retire the day that I start always depending on what I know from the past.
So I've got two leaders. Have you written books, Greg?
I have not written any books. I've written lots of chapters.
Lots of chapters. Okay. So the oldest person I wanted to ask you about in my physical therapy type world-changing practitioners, at least that's what I consider them currently. Maybe you have a different take on them. So we could start out with Robin McKenzie from New Zealand, centralization and the McKenzie stretches, which want to put the lordosis in the back. And your thoughts on Dr. Robin McKenzie from New Zealand, who's passed away maybe 20 some years ago.
Uh, Somewhere like that.
Yeah.
We dearly miss the man. I first met him in 1973. And we had been so ingrained. This was really my first recognition of a paradigm shift of how I could get so stuck in an idea that everything tends to fall in that. And I was into William flexion exercises that had been taught. Robin McKenzie, we go to the course and he's telling us to do just the opposite. And I thought the guy was crazy. I believed he was going to hurt everyone. And yet, it was really one of the first times I got to see dramatic improvements in just short periods of time in patients' conditions. Uh, so he's an extremely fascinating man. His concepts have been proven over and over in research. And so I'd say any physical therapist who is not aware and do not apply those principles is lacking in what they're providing for their patients.
You mentioned something flexion exercise. I missed the first word you said.
Williams flexion exercise. It was something that came into uh, the medical profession probably in the 50s and 60s. By the time I was in the early 70s, everyone was saying you had to avoid extension, just the opposite of what McKenzie taught us. And that was what we did with all of our patients: flex, 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 and strengthen them in flexion and have them hold a pelvic tilt as they walked around. And I just bought it hook, line, and sinker. And it was really following Robin McKenzie's experience that I whole shifted the way that I view things. I refused to ever get stuck in a belief system. And that's what he did really accomplish for me. It was dramatic.
When you mentioned, Greg, the belief system that it's been handed down to me, and I'm sure the previous 10 generations of people in my grandparents' lineage would have heard about the Protestant work ethic, the Puritan work ethic, hard work. Germany and Japan, they're known for, excessive work ethics. And the opposite of that would be a balanced lifestyle. And imagine, you and I working away in our businesses, taking care of our families, these types of things. And then all of a sudden going on a retreat where it was mostly meditation. You could call that doing less, even
Yeah.
though you're doing a lot with meditation. You're doing a lot of positive, but you're not doing like lifting something, or you're not doing a big walk, or you're not digging a ditch or something. So doing less, which is the opposite of many people, or doing nothing for an hour or for a weekend might provide an incredible gift into our mind, a new thought, or our body and our spirit in some way that we never thought about because we've been so busy working our tails off.
Yeah.
Have
Well,
you
I
had
think
an epiphany like that?
I think that it's an essential part for me. I was definitely a high achiever. Throughout going through school, I had to go throughout PT school and work at the same time I was going through PT school. So I averaged 3 and 4 hours a night sleep for weeks on a time and really pushed myself hard. And it really was a very interesting aspect. Once I got to the San Francisco area, it was the height of the human potential movement was really starting in there. And going to Esalen and having a weekend of silence. You know, I'd enter in 2 or 3 years in a row at New Year's. We'd do a full day of silence as we went into the new year. Those things really helped to calm my spirit and soul that I had so revved up on a sympathetic system that parasympathetic system really didn't have a chance in me. And it was through those that I also discovered the more alternative healthcare systems, I think you would call them, the Moshe Feldenkrais, learning from him, the whole Feldenkrais method, Ida Rolf with Rolfing, and
Alexander?
Alexander, absolutely, his upper cervical and his positioning, the Aston patterning approach. There were so many of them at that time that it was like a playfield for me of all of a sudden a shift from normal medical approach, which was we need to find pathology and how to treat that pathology, or at least recognize it, to a place where it was about human potential and it was about quality of life and efficient function. And it really changed the way that I approach my patients. Instead of seeing them as something I needed to treat their pain, I'd first look at what's their quality of life? Are they functioning efficiently? Is it the pain that's limiting their quality of life and efficient function? But your ultimate goal's got to be something above eradication of a problem, or elimination of a problem would be a better word.
A lot of people, when they come to see me or they hear about me and they want to know, they ask that question, what am I going to get? How much is it going to cost? These types of things. And I say it's hard to put down lifestyle and what a wellness and balanced lifestyle is and answer your question in a short sentence. But I could say that my goal would be to have you become more balanced in your mind, body, and spirit, and have you accept that new feeling, that new wellness feeling in mind, body, and spirit. And I said I'll leave you with one other thought. The word diet has been a big buzzword the last 60 years. And a lot of people think it has to do with nutrition and calories and what they're eating. Is it natural? Are they drinking things out of plastic? This types of things. But that's really a modern concept of diet. Do you know what the ancient Greeks, Greg, used the word dieta, where we get the word diet from?
I don't, but I'm very interested in finding out.
Okay, I'm going to go back to your 1960s Esalen meeting and share this thought. It stands for health and a healthy lifestyle. So that's what dieta is. And so nutrition is just one branch of that. But since we've been so bastardized, you could say, by the food and the food options and the agribusiness and the petrochemical business that taught us that food comes in a box and that our great grandmother didn't know what she was talking about, and that bacteria is the problem of the last 100 years, whereas our ancestors dealt with bacteria and fought it off. They had problems with bacteria and different viruses, etc., but they were stronger people if they made it through age 10, and then they could go to see the doctor for more major things like a falling off of a horse type of a thing, or a cut, or losing a limb or something, but a lot less going to see the doctor for antibiotics, which didn't exist in our great grandparents' time.
No. I think looking along that whole thing about quality of life, it really has a multiphasic and multidimensional requirements within it to really be effective. For myself as a physical therapist, the vast majority of patients who I see, I'm turning 77 in 6 days, so I'm going to be pushing towards that 80 mark soon. And with that whole time and at this point, all I really choose to see in patients are those who have really chronic, long-term, disabling kind of problems. Those are the ones that I'm drawn to. And I don't think a single one of them that we don't have to address diet, because we really know at this stage in research and in the experience of the human experience that a lot of the foods that we're eating are inflammatory in nature. And we also, through pain science, really understand that the vast majority of experiences of pain really is inflammation, of chronic pain. And we're dealing with an inflammatory issue. And so I would say that almost every single patient that we address and work with, we find inflammatory foods in their diet that dramatically improve their condition. And I think a lot of individuals have that experience is, wow, my knee pain's back again. How come my knee's hurting today? And oftentimes it goes back to what you ate the day before.
No question about that. I would, what would I say? If you work in a field where you see what people eat on a regular basis, and at one point in my life, I did some home remodel and contracting, and I saw what people from other countries who came here ate, and how much stomach distress they had, and how much visceral fat they would have, even if they were working all day, 10 hours of physical work. So something's not right. And now the people who in the 1940s were overweight and had those problems, which might have been 2% of the population, now it might be 70 or 80 or even higher percentage of the population. And it used to be the Western world, and now everywhere I travel to, I see that the Western world is caught up with these other countries.
Very much so. I think we still have to go to the hunter-gatherers right now on our planet to kind of get any sense of what our generations past lived like, back before we got into the mass production of foods and the ultra processed foods and everything else that we're dealing with now that are so challenging the health and the well-being. We might be living longer, but the well-being isn't necessarily being improved there.
Did you, throughout the course of your practice, Greg, hand people a sheet related to diet and inflammatory foods and anything along those lines?
I had a couple of sheets, but it always kept evolving so fast. I think it's more just verbal communication, looking at it, trying to decide what foods they're addicted to, which ones they eat the most. Are they part of the 4 or 5 foods that I have really found, and I think most researchers have found, to be the ones that are more likely to create that inflammation? And when somebody's been in pain for oftentimes 15, 20 years that I'm seeing, they usually are an open subject ready to try to make changes and are willing to do it, because a lot of patients in their first time around of pain aren't willing to change their diet. It is their holy grail.
Yeah, yeah. The McKenzie Method talks about centralization, the principle that exercise that encourage disc centralization should be promoted, and
Yep.
exercise that encourage disc peripheralization should be avoided. Can you touch on that, Greg?
The probably the biggest breakthrough that McKenzie helped us to understand was that many of the pains that we get in our arms and legs actually come from the spine. And so I'm sure you've heard of that brachial plexus or the sciatic nerve pain that goes down the leg. And so what McKenzie really discovered that was brilliant, and I have reconfirmed it with thousands of patients, is that when you've got pain going into the leg, let's say in a low back patient, your goal is to get the pain out of the leg first. So the first goal is help them get that peripheral symptoms centralized so that it's in the back. And they may even have more pain once you get the pain out of the leg. They may have more pain in the back and experiencing more pain, but we know they are getting better. There is a real indicator that that person now is on their road to healing. Where if all of a sudden now they've got more pain in their leg and less pain in their back, it's a pretty good indicator you're going the wrong direction.
Wow. And you had learned that early in your practice?
Yeah, I'd only been in the profession maybe about 3 years when I
Wow.
first started doing my studying of McKenzie. And so it was instrumental in those early years.
Had that name been bandied about in your physical therapy school at all?
No, no. Robin McKenzie was coming out of New Zealand, and he when he broke onto the scene in the United States, and I was lucky to be in San Francisco. I think we were probably one of the very first courses he ever taught in the United States that I got to study, and his huge paradigm shift was dramatic on our whole profession.
Was he, what I get from watching interviews with him, a soft-spoken gentleman?
Well, he could be loud, but most of the time he was very professional, very articulate,
Mhm,
and had a great sense of humor, like most down unders do,
mhm.
and uh, and could really illuminate on what he thought was. He definitely helped to change healthcare for back pain and neck pain and other areas.
It took Einstein in the early 1900s when he discovered the first theory of relativity. I think it was 7 years before it went through the channels. He was working at the
Right.
patent office in Zurich, perhaps, and so it took 7 years back then. And now we have a gazillion more PhDs around and tons more universities. And I don't know if it's easier to break through or harder to break through with your new idea or the same. What would you think about that?
Well, I think that it's probably uh, potentially easier because of the internet's access. What you're doing with being able to educate individuals through YouTube, the podcast, it just, I think the average individual is so overwhelmed they don't know where to go to and they don't
Yeah,
know what to trust. And Dr. Google doesn't always give them the answers that they would like. So I think it's created its own problem, but it's set up a really a reference system that new ideas can be dispelled and be able to disseminate it is a better word,
yeah.
much easier.
So we've touched on Dr. McKenzie, and now I've got a man out of Ontario. Can you guess who I'm going to bring up? University of Waterloo,
I don't.
Dr. Stuart McGill.
Oh, Stuart McGill. Yes. Stuart McGill and Paul Hodges are two great Australian researchers who have really delved into understanding muscle recruitment, muscle control, looking at the feed forward mechanism, looking at the core muscles. They have done extensive work and often are in disagreement with each other. It's so fascinating to watch the two of them go back and forth. But Stewart has definitely done a tremendous amount to help educate us through his research as to some of the best ways to help our patients develop what my wife, Vicki Johnson, who is a physical therapist, my co-owner of the Institute of Physical Art, calls an automatic core engagement, automation of the core.
So Dr. McGill from Ontario and the University of Waterloo, emeritus professor, produced over 245 peer-reviewed scientific journal papers, several textbooks, many international awards, and mentored over 37 graduate students during his scientific journey. So when I watch his videos, I almost it's almost like watching a master gardener where somebody brings in the tomato plant still in a bucket and they examine the leaves and then they examine the soil, they test the soil, and they say, well, here's what your problem seems to be. McGill does that. They bring in these athletes, as I'm sure you've had people come in from far away because they're off the Olympic team because of a knee or a back problem or whatever, and you set them down and you start your course of investigation, and then you figure out a plan, well, you figure out a prognosis, a plan of attack, etc. And McGill has been doing that, and he loves it. And like you, he just loves what he's doing, and he's going to live long, probably because he's so engaged in his daily work. And he would be older than you and a little bit younger than McKenzie, but I'm actually moved to go up and spend a week or two at one of his conferences to see if I can be touched by, the one of the what would you call them? I don't want to use the word Jesus, but an esteemed thinker,
I think
philosopher
an
who,
esteemed thinker is and a researcher. That is
yeah,
where Stewart has really done so much, and his writings are so influential. I would highly recommend it. I think that would mean a a would be a real valuable experience for you. But I would say you need to look at a little bit different also and look into Paul Hodges' work.
okay.
He has probably even more research projects. So fascinating of a man, and really helped us to break through to start understanding through his research uh, the core, to better understand how these selected muscles that should be contracting automatically um, become dysfunctional, and his mechanisms, which I don't use as much, but on both Stuart McGill and Paul Hodges, I don't necessarily use the tools that they've developed, but I use the research that they've done to be able to apply it. For me, I believe in manual resistance, that I can feel what's going on in the individual's body. So I can apply resistance someplace and know almost immediately where their core muscles are not firing, which joint might be more vulnerable, where they don't have that initiation that should be there to begin with. And so using the tools of PNF, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, are foundational in our teaching and everything that we do to help facilitate first the core before we expect the patient to have to exercise their core.
Is the term the core an old term that predates you and I by quite a bit of time, or is it more of a
No,
70s more recent?
it's more of a more recent one. Uh, my primary early on influence was I was at Kaiser Vallejo with Maggie Knott, one of the developers of the approach PNF. And she would always refer to it as trunk. The trunk's got to come in first. The trunk has to
Yeah.
be working. And we were working with with more people with neurological disabilities, and with what we were doing. And for anyone with a neural problem, if you can start getting those so-called core muscles contracting first, then they're more global muscles. Bearmark did research and he defined them as local and global muscles. And the global muscles absolutely require a stable foundation to function with and to move the body, but they require that those core muscles be able to have the pre-contraction to stabilize or to gently move each joint, because they're more likely one joint muscles.
You're familiar with the um, what is the thing called proverb? To a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yes.
So I've interviewed a highly known podiatrist, and he's got his own podcast. He's in maybe 20 years older than I am. I'm 60, so somewhere 15 years, 20 years older. And so he talks, he's been John McEnroe's podiatrist and many athletes, et cetera. And so he's in Chicago. So a podiatrist will want to look at the foot first. My question about that is if the hips are out of alignment, the spine's out of alignment, and you just go with the foot posture when you haven't had an adjustment from a chiropractor or manipulation by a physical therapist, you could be off. You could be off on your physics. Does that make sense?
Hi, this is Sifu Slim, author of The Aging Athlete. In this book, you're going to get to hear about two different groups of former high-performance athletes. One group, which is made up of 90% of the former athletes, does not do physical activity on a regular basis and tends to suffer the consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. The other group, which is made up of 10% of the former athletes, is doing physical activity on a regular basis and tends to thrive through the aging process, or at least has a better chance at coping with the aging process. We could have taken these folks to a lab and done all kinds of tests on them. Instead, we slowed them down and sat them down and asked them, in their own words, to describe why they're wired the way they are, so that we all, former athletes and non-athletes, can use some of their inspirational and motivational and mindset lessons in our own lives. I hope you pick up a copy today. You can go to theagingathlete.com. And when you have a chance to read it, I'd love to hear back from you to find out what your thoughts are on the stories of these aging athletes.
You know, I'm going to step back for just kind of defining the way that my wife and I really look at the human body for the care we provide, is that there are three physical foundations that need to be addressed in every patient. Number one is mechanical. How is their mechanical capacity? Research has absolutely proven that particularly the fascial tissues, the capsular tissues, have a real tendency after trauma to lose their mobility, to no longer have their functional capacity. So the first phase of what we really see of addressing an individual is returning that mechanical capacity. So if somebody comes in with back pain and their foot and ankle and their back pain is made worse from running and it's right-sided, and you see their right foot doesn't contact the floor well, that it is a supinated foot that's very rigid and doesn't have shock absorption in it. For that patient's back treatment, we often really need to start at that foot. As you mentioned, that's that foot, but it's being able to identify it by watching everybody function. For us in treatment, a lot of it is observation of seeing how they walk, they run, they crawl, they roll. Rolling is a very essential part of the human experience, and it goes back to our developmental sequence as infants. And so I'm not sure if I've strayed from the thought of what you were looking at.
Three physical foundations.
Yep, and the mechanical is first. Second of all is neuromuscular function. Do the muscles have normal initiation, strength, and endurance? You've got to be looking at that initiation and their ability to produce force and the ability to have endurance. And those all three need to be trained into it. And then motor control is really advanced movement systems, being able to have adaptability, being able to have multiple options of movement to perform one activity. A lot of my patients come in and say, putting my pants on caused pain because they've never put their pants on in a different way. They've never adapted to any other mechanism than right foot first and how they get into those habits. And so we believe we want to expand the motor system to have multiple options for any activity that you're trying to perform.
Okay, so let me rephrase this in this way, Greg. If they're going to
You're
put
welcome.
if they're going to put my foot in a mold or put it on a something that's going to take some imaging of it, shouldn't my spine and my hips be as close to a good alignment posture before I step on that machine or before I go into the mold that they're going to cast me in?
I really do not put somebody in orthotics unless it's an emergency state to protect them in some way or another, until we've got their mechanical system all the way up to their head and neck and their cranium and their dura mobility has to be looked at before I put any type of orthotics. And I don't believe in rigid orthotics. I really want pliable orthotics that allow the foot to have more natural ability. You don't go to Africa and watch the Maasai run across the Serengeti and see them having any orthotics or needs for orthotics in their feet. That is really, it was our trip to Africa that changed my whole view of feet, of watching the adaptability and the coordination and the use of feet that the Maasai could do.
Yeah. I did come into a breakthrough, and it was a massage therapist whose clientele are made up of distance runners and triathletes. And so I had plantar fasciitis for a long time, maybe even since high school. I just didn't know about it until I started having some pain in that area, maybe about 20 years ago. And so I did the normal things that you do, the stretches, the massage, etc. And so I went, and it wasn't going away. After my running, I still had some pain. Sometimes I'd wake up in the morning with that pain. And so I saw this massage therapist who gave me an hour massage one time. And I said, hey, by the way, just like I asked you when I was going in for my vocal cords, and I said, what do you have for my back? And you told me to try tennis balls. And so this woman, at the end, I said, what do you have for plantar fasciitis? She said, it's very easy. She said, you do the bottom of the foot. Just consider your right foot. You've got a right side, a center, sorry, right side would be here, center and a left side. I want you to take a tennis ball. You could go fully new tennis ball or, diminished in pressure tennis ball. And I want you to go front to back twice in each those 3 lanes that I showed you. And so I had a tennis ball in my car. I brought it in to her place. I said, how about this? And I did the thing. She said, that's what I want you to do. So I've been doing that. It's another part of my therapy and my exercise that's been going now for maybe 12 years is the tennis ball front to back.
Yep.
And I do that every morning when I wake up. A couple of times I've gotten like a phone call and I've gotten out to my exercise area or my running area and I forgot to do them. And if I don't have a tennis ball, I have to use a rock, or my hands and go in there and manipulate that area. Whatever I have, I'll do it because it works. It's like night and day. Have you heard about this front to back massage?
Absolutely. It's something that I've used with many patients from a long time. I've used it. But I'd have to say, anybody that has to do it daily usually have problems within the midfoot. What I've really found is that the midfoot in most of our individuals are restricted. With that restricted midfoot, and that's in modern man, not in hunter-gatherers. And in modern man, we've gotten our restricted midfoot, that needs to be mobilized first so that it takes the strain off of the plantar fascia. And so most individuals who have to use a ball every day usually have hypomobilities in the midfoot. And they may have a supinated foot, one that is drawn up that has a high arch, or they could have a flat foot or pronated foot, or that you've lost the arch. Most of them still have an intrinsic midfoot that's a supinated foot that needs to be mobilized to take the strain off of that plantar fascia. And so most of my patients will start out with a tennis ball, but if I do a good job of getting that foot mobilized, they can transition away from it and only use it when they start having problems, and start reducing the amount of times that they have to be in their orthotics so that the foot can start learning to adapt to the surface, because really the ground is so important for us to have our foot being touched and to get into, being on the sand, walking on your rugs. All of those areas help to really develop that foot and its proprioceptance and its ability to have good kinesthetic awareness.
Wonderful. So yeah, I never thought that what I was doing on that tennis ball was the perfect of all worlds. All I knew is that plus one of the stretches that I saw on YouTube from a guy in New York who's an Italian-American physical therapist with a huge YouTube following. He gave another stretch that I use, and if you like, I can send that to you. But when I use those
Great.
two things combined, I have no pain and more function. But of course, you can become a black belt in anything you do, and that's the tricky part I found with the aging. I'm I'm writing books, so to become a black belt or advanced black belt in writing books, it's a full-time job, and I already have the physicality every day, the studying wellness and fitness and athletes every day, and I've got a litany of things that I've already become a brown belt or a black belt in, and you can't become an extreme black belt in too many things, right? So that's where I am on the foot and the knee and the posture and my plantar fascia. It's one more thing that I'm not a black belt in. I'm more of a blue belt, one step up from white belt.
Well, and I think that it's really admirable how well you take care of yourself. But I would say I would love to see if I could treat those feet of yours so you wouldn't need a ball every day. I don't see anybody in the Amazon jungle using balls to keep their feet loosened up. And I think that we get addicted to having to do a certain protocol when there is an underlying source for that problem rather than a fix. All you're doing
Yeah,
is fixing it every day.
yeah,
You're not
no,
treating the source.
no. I'm not definitely not treating the source.
And I don't mean to
Uh,
be tough on you, but
no, no, no. You're a professional who sees a solution, and you can't help yourself but wish that solution be implemented. Correct?
it's correct.
Yeah.
And it's just like going back to the loss of voice that you had when we treated your throat. Everyone's was looking at it in all their different ways of looking at it, but nobody looked at it for the mechanical system. How well your vocal cords working? How do those vocal cords work? What's the impact of your larynx? What goes on in your cricoid and your thyroid cartilages, your two that have to function well? Yours was a dysfunction of your cricoid thyroid, your cricoid cartilage on your thyroid cartilage, impacting your ability for your vocal cords to work well. And it's also your glottis. And I think you're well aware that closing off your glottis helps to increase your interpharyngeal and your
Mhm.
interthoracic pressures. And everything about your posture has to do with your pressure systems.
Yeah.
What's going on in your abdominal pressure system, your thoracic, and in your interpharyngeal is as important as anything else we do with our core, is really developing that ability to have efficient posture in which those three pressure systems really help to provide support and dynamics as we do heavy lifting, carrying, and pushing and pulling.
Yeah, no question about it. And before me in '03, I imagine you had already worked with people that you had diagnosed a situation similar to mine, right? I wasn't the brand new guy for you that you
No,
had to come up with something out of thin air.
I had it really actually began in my work when I was at Kaiser Vallejo with Maggie Knott learning PNF. Some basic mobilizations of the throat that we did for our hemiplegic patients who had lost their ability to really vocalize, speak, and work. And we have a lot of tools that we can use for those neurological ones. I just expanded it into the performing arts world. And so when we lived in Marin County and had our clinic in San Francisco, we worked a lot with the Broadway and the performing arts and the singers of San Francisco being able to regain their voice. And that was really the beginning stages for me, was being in that environment and seeing so many individuals who were struggling and that they really weren't acid reflux. And if you ever have a throat problem and you go to a throat and nose specialist, vast majority of them are going to say you have acid reflux. That's the reason you're losing your voice. And I'd say it's only a minor component of it.
Speaking of voice, Greg, do you have any H2O handy?
Yes, and I have been attempting to keep it going. Thank you for reminding me, Sifu.
I sent you, Greg, some videos from this gentleman in San Diego. He, at age 17, had spine problems worse than I have now. I'm 62. And, he had lumbar stenosis, he had spondylolisthesis, bulge disc, and maybe even more than that. And he was a surfer, he was athletic, nice, intelligent guy. And he went in for a chiropractic adjustment. So, first of all, let me share this. I've been to more chiropractors than anyone I know because I travel a lot, and I try to do one per week. And if I have an injury, it might be 2 times per week. So I've really been to a lot of chiropractors. Joe Montana from 70s and the 80s football used to see one before and after each game. And I would imagine, since he was a top quarterback in the world at that time, maybe saw one even before and after each practice. I know the modern people do see these people regularly, and some teams have 3 chiropractors, some with similar specialties, some with very different specialties, who travel with the team full time. The PGA Golf has this. Most of these pro basketball, they have this. So what I'm going to share now is not to besmirch chiropractics. It could happen in any walk of life, in any professional. The person coming to do your electric, there could be a problem with anything you hire somebody for. But this particular person, who's now a physical therapist with a doctorate, had a bad adjustment, which happens. It could have been the person was having an off day. Could have been that he didn't palpate correctly. Either could have been a person without skill in that particular area. Sometimes chiropractors don't get the adjustment on the first try, and they may force it. I shouldn't say sometimes. It has happened to me, so it's happening to other people. So he had a bad adjustment. He got injured from that. And then he went to a friend of his who had a different way of looking at it. And he said, I want you to try this. That particular thing he tried, which I can't remember right now, worked for him. And then this person decided he didn't want to do back surgery because of all of the fallout from back surgeries. And again, I'm not going to besmirch surgeons at all. I know they do a lot of good work, but there's some surgeries that you wish you didn't have to do because the strike ratio of success is very low. The lumbar spine is one. Once you do the cage and the disc replacements or the laminectomies, you have to cut pieces off. There's a lot of fallout, even with the modern 2025 surgery. So this person went and did a degree in physical therapy. He embraced parts of yoga, but he didn't like the hollowing out of yoga, which means if you've got your abdomen where your belly button is to your spine, some forms of yoga, maybe all of them, want you to hollow out. So they're going to bring your air and they're going to release it. So they're going to have you come down to here. He believes that's called hollowing, I believe. He believes in what's called bracing, where you're going to build this whole area with breath and you're going to have stability, like a can of Coke when it's full has stability. When you crush the can without Coke in it and you release the Coke and you release the air, now you have a Coke can that's much more narrow, which is what the hollowing, I believe, is a good way to think about it. Over to Gregg for his thoughts on hollowing versus bracing.
Well, it is a major area, and I'm actually going to step back to Joe Montana because I was in practice with Dr. White, who did Joe Montana's lumbar surgery, Arthur White. And we did, and were involved in the rehab of Joe Montana to get him back on the field again.
You had your hands on him?
I never touched him. No, it was ours. It was part of our whole system of therapists that we had, and he was seeing other ones within our system. Dr. White was really one of the first ones that brought from Europe, from the Norwegian system, and some of the concepts of bracing. And so we really started looking at bracing more. And in my early years, really did a lot of work of teaching patients how to actively, consciously contract the muscles that they needed to contract to help protect their spine. And really, my wife tells an interesting story of a surgeon that would be in surgeries. I think he was a neurosurgeon, sometimes 5-6 hours. And she said, you need to learn how to, during these 5 to 6 hour surgeries, how to hold your abdomen in tight. And he looked at her and he says, "Are you kidding me? I don't have any energy power to be thinking about holding my abdomen in tight or drawing in." And that's the Australians brought in the term drawing maneuver, which is also part of what you hear from Pilates nowadays. And I think Joseph Pilates would roll over in his grave if he knew what they were doing right now. So I'm going to make a point on a different direction here. Anytime we do something cognitively with our muscles, that we're cognitively thinking of bracing or of doing anything, of altering how our knee functions, we have shifted a system that is built upon automaticity, upon being an automatic movement and an automatic core, to one now that has shifted to a different part of our nervous system, our cognitive mind. What we have found is that if we can facilitate that core so that they get an automatic brace, it is far better than cognitive bracing. Cognitive bracing works, but if you happen to be talking to your friend and you push open a door and you forget to automatically cognitively brace, you're going to hurt your back again because you're using the wrong system. So for me, the developmental sequence is a very important component, because there's never an infant who goes through a good developmental sequence that doesn't have their core firing by the time they're 3 and 4. Their core's firing. How'd that happen? Did we say you can't walk until you can draw in your back or you can brace? No, we don't teach them that way. So if an infant can develop the core, why can't an adult develop the core automatic like that infant does, instead of having to do it cognitively? So for me, everything I can draw away and train a patient to be able to have an automatic core is far better than anything cognitive. So I think I've made that point now, but I do think that Sifu, that we need to be finding more mechanisms to not be using cognitive minds to be able to do what are automatic functions.
I agree. This gentleman in San Diego, his name is Dr. Ryan Peebles, Peebles.
I've heard of him.
Quite a big YouTube following, and congratulations to him for being in his 30s with a wife and a kid, and being disabled at age 17 to have put himself through physical therapy school. And he's such a calm, like Zen type guy.
Yep.
I really, when I'm done with Dr. McGill and Hodges, I'm going to go spend some time in San Diego with Peebles, because if there was an easy way for surgery and it was like a 98% guarantee to fix my current lumbar stenosis, and I've got claudication, which is the bummer. I don't have any pain, but during the day, if I've been lying down working on my computer too long, or I'm sitting somewhere too long, all of a sudden I'll get a pre-cramp or a pre-claudication, maybe I could call it. And I go, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. And that's if I've already taken my magnesium and I've done everything right, what I think everything right, I could be out of adjustment. So I had this happen 2 days ago. I'm getting all these pre-cramps and pre-claudications, not a lot, but I could feel that they were there a couple of times. And then I go into the chiropractor at the Joint Chiropractor. You're familiar with that company?
Yep.
Yeah. And that helps people who travel a lot like I do. And she looked at my leg length, and my right leg was, let me see, was it the right leg that was longer or shorter? I can't remember right now, but it was 1.5 inches longer, one of the legs. And so the hips were out of alignment, and there was tension in the psoas and some other areas in the hip flexors. So she did some very simple massage and a very simple adjustment before she was done with her treatment, pulled my legs back down, and they were pretty darn close. And then she did her full treatment. And when we got done, they were on line, so the hips were in alignment, the feet were in alignment. So there's the answer. I thought I was doing everything right, but I was really out of alignment. Over to Gregg for his thoughts on this.
Well, you kind of caught me a little speechless right there as to how to respond to this. Definitely chiropractors use a lot of the leg length components. For you can look at, if you just look at your screen, you can see the length of your left shoulder is much longer than your right. There's a there's a definite difference in the way that you're sitting on your pelvis.
Yeah.
There's an asymmetry in your face. How you always hold your head is slightly to your right.
That's
So you're
right.
always to your right. Your
Yeah.
eyes level when you're to your right. So you've got to, and I know I'm doing a lot here. You've got a sphenoid dysfunction because your ears and your eyes are not symmetrical to where you have to hold your C1. So you're constantly here
Hmm.
in that direction. So getting the legs straight is only a small component of the answer. What
Yeah.
really for you is how do we get you so that you've got better right-sided respiration because you don't have as big of a right side of your rib cage as you've got of your left side. How to get you to sit more equally on your pelvis because your pelvis is asymmetrical. Those are mechanical dysfunctions that are driven by lack of core contractions that need to be refacilitated. And so I would say, yes, those things are there, but they're usually only temporary fixes until you get to the source of where your real
Wow.
problem is.
Wow.
And for me, anyone who needs weekly adjustments has a source someplace that's never been addressed
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I mean, I can go years without having to do it. And I'm, as I said, 77. And I don't need to get mine regularly because I've got my core firing. I've got things, so I don't have to do everything every day. And
I
that's
wonder if
what my goals are for my patients, is to get them
wonderful. I
independent.
agree with everything you just said. And it's, again, I could become a blue belt in what you just mentioned and start that journey on the sitting posture, standing posture, my neck. I looked at pictures of me when I was 10 years old. I'm tilted to the right. So,
That could be
I
from childbirth. Your
could be
cranium
from
could
childhood.
have been disrupted at childbirth and
Yeah.
it affected it because
Yeah.
you want your eyes level. So you have to tilt your head because your eyes aren't level. Straighten up your head and look at what happens to your eyes. So straighten your head by a little bit more to the left. There. That is a straight head. But your nose isn't straight. So you've had some kind of a trauma to the nose. Your two zygomatic arches are different. And you really don't want to look at me right now through that because your left eye just doesn't focus. You have to go here for your left eye to focus.
Uh-huh.
So I would do complete treatment on your eyes also to really get that left eye much better function. I do resistance to
Wow.
it and mobilization to it.
Wow. I've never had an eye adjustment. I've had, pressure points in this area, but I've
Yep.
never had an eye adjustment.
I didn't mean to sit here and go through a complete
No,
assessment of
no,
what I can
no, no.
see, but I'd
I'm
be very
glad.
fascinated to see what your pelvic girdle's doing and the
Yeah.
position of your coccyx, because I think
Yeah.
each one of those are areas that have set you so that that left shoulder is so
Yeah.
long and that right shoulder is short and raised.
My autobiography of my mechanical side would be called A Life of Compensation.
I think that's for most of us.
Did, if you're allowed to say it, did Montana need his chiropractic adjustments because he was always getting whacked and he's doing this one-sided sport with the right arm, or was he somebody that needed it even if he was just a regular person walking around?
I can't really say because I
Hmm.
never treated him. I didn't put my hands on him.
Hmm.
Uh, I can tell you from dealing with lots of athletes because I do see a lot of athletes come to Steamboat to be treated. We treat our local athletes, our ski team and our high school football team. And there's no question that anytime we do a asymmetrical activity, such as throwing a baseball pitcher or a quarterback throwing with that right arm, it alters the mechanics throughout the system. And joints have a habit of becoming what the chiropractors would say fixated. I'd say restricted or hypomobile. Uh, and those things can create a cascade of problems down the line. So for Joe Montana, keeping those joints functioning, it was very important. But what wasn't addressed is the fascial tissue. And have you studied fascia very much?
Yes, I've been an acupressure guy and a myofascial release guy since '86.
then you have a good idea of it. Those fascial tissues are usually what drives the joints to get fixated. So for me, I want to mobilize the joints, but I got to figure out why their movements, why the muscles, why the fascia is not allowing them to be able to keep those joints mobile, because joints should not continue to get locked and needing to be adjusted. That is something that I have very few patients that I have to readjust, and I'm a very good manipulator. All of my manipulations are not done passively. The patient is actively contracting when I apply my force to really protect them. So we don't have those, how I train my therapists, we don't have those patients that get bad adjustments, and plus we only manipulate what needs to be. We mobilize if we can, and
Yeah,
we get those joints so they're mobile without having to always do a thrust.
got it. Because you were able to diagnose some things on me and you had the time to look at me just through the screen here, if this hasn't come up, the eye level and the neck level, is it because I didn't ask, or is it because people's framework was, you're coming in for a standard adjustment, I can't fix these big deals, even though you're out of, alignment since birth? What do you think that was from?
I don't know, and I can't speak for others. I do know that the system that we teach has a lot of unique natures to it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is just really studying in depth efficient movement and posture. And your posture demonstrates some challenges. Even the way
Yeah,
that your mouth moves
yeah,
shows that your occlusion isn't there. The narrowness of your upper jaw
mm,
demonstrates that you probably didn't get breastfed for very long, and your hard palate is narrow. And then it's narrower on your right side than it is your left side. And so that whole thing there is, I think, is affected. And so I would, on you, with your cranium, really get started inside your mouth and start getting your hard palate in a more efficient state. If you look at hunter-gatherers again, who often are breastfed up to 2 to 3 years, they have big, wide, round craniums.
yeah, yeah.
More we get away from breastfeeding, the longer our craniums are, and then the less we have that balance. And we end up
Mm-hmm.
in positions like you are, with your head
Mm-hmm.
sideways, because you're having to level your eyes because your eyes never developed a balanced position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was fortunate that I wasn't bottle fed until late in the game, but certainly wasn't 3 years. I don't know how many. My mom passed away, so I can't ask her how many months I was on being breastfed. So, but I also come from like a lot of people that don't have big wide jaws. Thin people, Germanic people, and actually, when I go to Germany, I see a lot of people who look like me, and
They
probably
do.
the biggest.
I agree.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Last two things, Greg. Reciprocal inhibition, is that a word that you use?
Oh, absolutely. And it's a major part of the PNF, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation approach, is that being able, when you've got certain motor patterns. Now, a lot of people talk about it as the muscles as being overused. It's comes from the brain. It doesn't come from the muscle. The solution isn't in treating the muscle. The muscle needs treatment because, let's say your quadriceps are way overused, they become shortened. So they need to be able to be lengthened. You've got to go in and free up the fascia between the different layers, because those fascial tissues limit play of those tissues. But reciprocal inhibition would be using the hamstrings and training the hamstrings so that the brain now starts coordinating itself and recalibrating itself for having the hamstring function being equal to the quadriceps. So we can get a muscle so that it can reciprocally inhibit the opposite side so that you can get more range, but it can also reciprocally be able to strengthen. So one of the big ones that's inhibited in many of us in modern society is our gluteus maximus. We don't get good push-off. Therefore, if we don't get good push-off, we don't have a good soleus because we haven't used our foot adequately. So somebody with a supinated foot tends not to get good extension of the leg, will tend to be inhibited in the gluteus maximus. And so then the psoas become over dominant. And so we're looking at that reciprocal inhibition and reciprocal patterns so that when I push off efficiently with and get my glutes to fire, my psoas now are automatically on a neuromuscular sense facilitated so my leg swings through automatically rather than being something that takes effort. It's done automatically. So for a lot of our patients, getting them to learn to get push off automatically helps to improve that quadricep function, reduces that demand on the quadriceps, and you'll see that reciprocal inhibition, reciprocal function is a very important part of our care.
And that relates to being in a one-sided sport like the tennis serve and Joe Montana.
No
I
question.
will share this about Jack Nicklaus, who wound up becoming disabled in his late 40s or early 50s from being traveling a lot and playing golf, a very one-sided sport, and then being a busy father with many kids. He didn't do egoscue and yoga and these types of things. He was a smoker. He used to walk through the woods in the 60s and 70s, so he didn't get caught on camera, which I commend him for. I don't know how long he remained an addict to smoking. I think he was done sometime in the 1980s. So hallelujah for
That's
Jack
what
on
I
that.
understand also.
Yep. He's
Arnold
a
Palmer
nice.
didn't hide it.
No, Arnold Palmer didn't hide it. And
And
Jack, go ahead, finish your thought,
no,
please.
I was going to say, even if you get to the baseball world of Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris and that group, cigarette smoking was natural for my parents' generation. The World War II generation got addicted to it overseas because tobacco companies sent them free cigarettes.
Yep. And the advertisements way back in the day said there were health benefits, right? Remember that?
Yeah, I was born in 1948, and the Life magazine that a friend of mine sent is filled with advertisements as saying, 2 out of 3 doctors recommend Camels for relaxing.
Yeah, I'm sure if you're an addict, it's definitely relaxing to have a cigarette, correct? Uh, what I wanted to share about Jack Nicklaus, who's been an idol of mine, as is Bruce Lee and Muhammad Ali and many other great movers of their body, Michael Jackson, is
Mine too.
yeah, you too, huh? And Jack LaLanne, of course, my first idol of physicality. I knew him before I knew who Bruce Lee was back in the 60s. And so I will say this, intuition's an amazing thing. And Jack Nicklaus was a well-rounded athlete. He was on his basketball team in high school. He's a strongly built kid. And if he could run with that, they called him the Golden Bear, he probably had in high school and college era, he probably had maybe an extra 30 to 40 pounds on him compared to what he was in the late 80s. So he was a well-built guy and had adipose tissue on, but definitely a great hand-eye coordination guy and incredible work ethic and incredible focus and knew how to train. So I don't want to go too much into Jack Nicklaus, but I will share one thing that relates to balancing out the ability. So golf, this one-sided direction sport this way, he played tennis righty. And so that's the other way on the backhand. So if you're hitting that backhand and then you're opening your hips, differently on the forehand, and then running a court, which is good because you don't run in the typical game unless you're playing speed golf. So he knew enough to do tennis, and he said he was about a 12 handicap in tennis, which is a pretty good level tennis player. I'm probably something like that at the best time, like a year or two ago, is probably that same level, like a high 3.5, which is equivalent to a 12
Very
handicap
good.
in tennis. So tell me your thoughts on his move to do that balancing of two different directions there.
I think it's absolutely essential. And I think you're well aware of the challenges modern baseball pitchers have, and the whole asymmetry of them. And if I were much more involved in them, I really would try to get their left upper extremity, their right-handed pitcher, their left upper extremity doing much more, that would be part of it. Because when you start really looking at the average tennis player or pitcher, doing something that hunter-gatherers don't do. Hunter-gatherers don't get into such asymmetrical activities. We do in our society. And I think that they would have to balance themselves. And I think Jack Nicklaus really helped himself by making sure he could do the backhand, by developing it. But it's also being able to do the opposite swing, getting that balance there, because the brain gets too stuck in movement patterns. And the opposite movement pattern is lost from that motor cortex. And so I'd say I really work with our pitchers and particularly the ones that have that right-sided, they've got their huge pecs, they've developed their shoulder muscles and deltoids are so much larger than on the other side. I want them to start balancing out and start on a daily basis, developing their sensory and motor cortex of the left side.
Wonderful. That's probably a good place to wind down, Gregg. I had some questions, and we could, if you're open to it, we could do another time where I'd like to talk about the most operated part of the human body. Do you know what that part is?
The most operated?
Yeah.
I don't. The most one that has the most operation.
Correct.
Now I
Operated
understand.
on. The most operated on part of the human body.
Well, I've heard lectures on this, and whether they're accurate or not is the number one part of the spine that has surgery to it is L5. The supraspinatus has the number one of aspect in the shoulder, and the ACL and meniscus in the knee. But I don't know what you're going to tell me.
I think the number is 900,000 meniscus and knee operations per year. And meniscus is dropping, thankfully, like a rock, because people are realizing that the studies are showing that the meniscus surgeries have much more arthritis immediately, and then certainly over 10 years. And those surgeries, unless it's the certain one, not the horseshoe tear, but it's something like that. It's a funny name.
Well, it's the root. So if you tear your root of your meniscus, you lose all of your nutrition going to the meniscus, and you have to have the root repaired.
That's it, the root. Okay.
But most every other meniscus tear in the early stages, I've been able to manage. I have developed a whole system of being able to do manual therapy to enhance meniscus function and to return it back to a better state. And so I like to see him first before I dive into suggesting surgery, because as you know, they've looked at large numbers of individuals who did not get a meniscus surgery and a large number of individuals who did get meniscus surgery. And that research showed that the ones who got the meniscus surgery ended up with total knees much sooner.
Correct. And that's something that if you're open to it, I can send you an invitation, and sometime in a month or so.
I would love to have another discussion with you.
That's great, Gregg. I appreciate it.
Because there's lots of issues we haven't even touched that I love to bloviate on.
Well, we could do one every 2 months, because Gregg is going to retire and take up something else other than this at some point. It's possible. It's more likely that you'll take up something else and you'll want to turn off this side of your intention. And it'd be good to have Gregg archived for future physical therapists, other medical people, and people like me, athletes and non-athletes, so they could tap into some of this stuff. And if I can be the initiator and the helper, the facilitator of that, I would love to do it.
Well, you are a good interviewer, and I would like to share that my most present really passion has been the autonomic nervous system and the manual treatment of the vagus nerve and of a lot of the sympathetic chain ganglions. We're treating individuals with long COVID, with autoimmune disorders successfully, and really helping people with depression and anxiety. All of them are autoimmune related, and it's the imbalance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. So my present real drive is treating those types of individuals and working with the vagus nerve. So I've gone through my phases, each one of them in these last 54 years of being a PT, and and so now that's my excitement
Yeah.
is really trying to figure out, can we help people? Can we serve them? Can we make a difference in their lives?
Wonderful. So I'm going to ask you to stay on after I wind down our conversation. I want to ask
That'll
you
be
one
great.
more thing. So stay with me. So I'm Sifu Slim, and we've been chatting with Gregg Johnson today, and I'll put his website. You can tell us your website, Greg.
Well, it's the Institute of Physical Art.com is where our continuing education is. And we are educating physical therapists around the world. And particularly here in the United States, we take them through certification, through residencies and fellowship programs, so that they can advance their skills and be able to develop a high level of competency. You can go on our website to find a physical therapist who have been trained by us. We have all of them listed, and I think we have around 400 that are certified at this point that you could look at. So that's instituteofphysicalart.com.
So what you're
And
doing is
also
like,
for our clinical Johnson & Johnson Physical Therapy and also IPA Physio are all clinics that are within our family. My
okay,
son is a physical therapist, and he has developed the IPA Physio brand.
is he the Westmont grad?
What's that?
Is he the Westmont graduate?
Yes, he is. How did you know?
Well, I was moving to Santa Barbara when I was with you, and you said, hey, yeah, Westmont. And my
Yeah,
son.
that he is the Westmont graduate. My other son was an Azusa Pacific graduate. And so one
There
of
you
them is a
go.
physical therapist, the other one's a very successful songwriter producer.
Oh, hallelujah. And they're both went to Christian colleges.
They did.
Yeah. So wonderful, Greg. I'm glad we got that out. And hang with me through this. I'll say
I
goodbye to the
will.
audience. So please, audience, give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to subscribe, please do so. And if you have any questions, please leave respectful comments down below. They can be silly if you'd like, but respectful. And I'm Sifu Slim at sifuslim.com, fitness, wellness, and life coach. And my books are available through sifuslim.com or theagingathlete.com. And we look forward to sharing another interview in the future. And big aloha from where I am currently in Port St. Lucie, Florida. Aloha.